This vehicle was one of the few tanks that served through World War II, from the beginning until the very end, and was used in every theater of the war. It fought in the Battle of France, in North Africa, in the Pacific jungles, and on the vast Soviet steppe. And despite its shortcomings and aging design, it was a great asset in the Allied arsenal. This was the British Infantry Tank Mark II, or the Matilda II. So let's see the history of this vehicle today. The interwar period was a slow time for tank development, but in the 1930s, concerned about all the political turmoil in the European countries, the British Army started new developments to modernize its forces. In 1934, a decision was made to develop new infantry tanks. The designs didn't require too high speeds and maneuverability, just enough to keep up with the advancing infantry, but they had to be well armored to be able to take enemy fire. Two alternatives were examined: a machine gun equipped and quite well armored variant, which was planned to be used in large numbers, and a larger cannon equipped variant with even heavier armor to be able to withstand artillery fire and to take on enemy tanks. The peacetime economy, which only started to recover from the 1929 financial crisis, only allowed for the development of one of them, and ultimately General Sir Hugh Wells decided in favor of the smaller machine gun equipped variant. In the next year, a draft of the new infantry tank, called the Matilda, was presented to the army by Sir John Carden, the head of tank development at the Vickers-Armstrong Company. This vehicle received the specification number A11, and though it was the smaller from the proposed designs, it still carried quite heavy armor for the time, 60mm thickness on the front and sides, which, as it turned out during the Battle of France a few years later, was strong enough to withstand the shells from the German 37mm anti-tank guns. But despite being a 1930s design, this tank was very much an obsolete concept. With only a two-man crew, driver in the front and the commander in the turret, and its only weapon being the machine gun, it was not effective. They participated in the fighting in the Battle of France and had some success against the German forces, but these engagements also showed their drawbacks. The A11, though originally was planned to be used in large numbers, was never produced in quantity, as by the time it entered production, the policies changed, and the attention turned towards the bigger cannon-carrying infantry tanks. By the time this obsolete model started its trials, at the spring of 1937, the more advanced A12 design was already on the drawing board. As we mentioned, parallel to the A11 development, a cannon-equipped tank was already imagined, loosely based on the French Renault NC design, and featuring the new two-pounder gun developed by the Vickers-Armstrong Company. But the development of this tank at the beginning was very slow, thanks to the lack of funding, and the first drafts only appeared after the A11 already entered testing. The first proposals for this bigger infantry tank appeared at the end of 1936, and while many of the specifications changed in the early phases, the main problem was to find a suitable engine for the heavy vehicle. While the new design, weighing 25 tons, was not heavy compared to later World War II tanks, but by late 1930s standards and compared to contemporary designs, it was. Weighing almost 3 times as much as the German Panzer II, and was twice as heavy as the British A13 cruiser tank. The engine problem in the end was resolved during the design phase, incorporating parts already tried on other designs and prototypes. A variant of the A7 medium tank tested around this time, the A7E3 model, used an ingenious solution when a more powerful engine was needed. It used a pair of AEC diesel engines, both connected to the same transmission, doubling the engine power. This twin-engine solution was chosen as the power plant for the new infantry tank design, while the suspension and tracks were taken from the A6 medium tank, with some modifications. By this time the requirements were updated to 75mm of armor thickness as well, which was able to withstand all known anti-tank guns of the time. The new project received the specification number A12, and it was the first British tank to use big castings in its design. Though this made production easier, on the other hand these cast parts were very complex shapes, and required many man-hours to finish and fit together. Contrary to the early A11 design, which had no track armor at all, the A12 featured fully enclosed tracks, protected on the side as well. The first prototype of the new infantry tank was finished in April 1938, and the advantages over the A11 design were immediately obvious. Though the new design carried thicker armor and heavier armament, thanks to the new drivetrain, it was faster and more maneuverable than its predecessor. The A12 confidently passed the early trials, thanks to using mostly tried and tested parts. And already in June the same year, a contract was issued for the production of the new tank, accepted into service as Infantry Tank Mark II. As the situation in Europe began to look like a powder keg, the first contract was followed by many more, and at least 6 companies received orders for these tanks. And not a moment too soon, as setting up the assembly lines took a long time, and the first production Mark II infantry tanks only rolled out of the factories in September 1939. The same month, Germany invaded Poland and World War II started. Production was very slow in the first months, and by the time about 50 units were produced, the tank received a new machine gun. In place of the heavy water-cooled Vickers weapon, the newly accepted air-cooled Bisa machine gun was installed, creating the Mark II-A variant. The production ramped up slowly for these new tanks. In 1940, only 356 units were built. Afraid of a German invasion, the British turned to the US and requested if they could produce the new infantry tank for them. One unit, T-7861, was sent over to the US for demonstration and was tested at Aberdeen. But after the tests, the Americans refused to manufacture the type, offering their own M3 Lee design to the British instead. One part the US forces found interesting on the vehicle was the twin-engine setup, which inspired the development of the GM 6046 power plant using 2 GMC diesel engines. The tracks used on these vehicles had seen many different variations as well. The original track design was found to have low traction, especially in snow and on icy roads, so as an interim solution, they have grousers welded on them. After testing several different variants, the Ford type tracks were found to have the best traction, and were adopted for production on later models. And since we are talking about different changes to the design, let's take a look at its variants. The Infantry Tank Mark II, or Matilda II, was the original design, featuring the Vickers machine gun. It was followed by the Mark II-A, or Matilda II Mark II version. This variant used the newly accepted Bisa machine gun. The Mark III model used updated Leyland engines, instead of the original AEC ones. Their distinctive feature is an exhaust pipe on each side of the engine deck, while the models using the original AEC engines only had a visible exhaust on the left side. The Mark IV again introduced small improvements on the powertrain. It featured a smaller commander's cupola, and the light on the turret was removed. A close support variant of the Mark IV featured a 3-inch howitzer, capable of firing high explosive rounds instead of the original 2-pounder gun, which could only fire solid shells. And the final Mark V variant introduced an improved gearbox and other small changes. Apart from the upgraded versions, there were several specialized variants as well, based on the Matilda chassis, like the Baron and Scorpion flare tanks, or the CDL variant, which carried a big searchlight in a cylindrical turret. To test if it's possible to upgun the tank, there was an experimental variant, featuring the A27 turret, carrying the 6-pounder gun. The Matilda Frog variant featured a flamethrower in place of the main gun. "18 of the Matildas were also converted to carry dozer blades, to clear up roadblocks or other obstacles. The Matilda Hedgehog variant carried a spigot mortar setup over the engine deck, which could fire high explosive rounds, each of them weighing 65 pounds. One Matilda sent to the Soviet Union through Lend-Lease was also modified to an experimental variant, carrying the 76mm Dis-5 cannon, but this variant was found unsuccessful, as the turret was too small for the bigger gun. The Matilda tank weighted around 25 tons, thanks to its heavy armor, which was between 47 and 78mm on the half front, On the side, it featured armor plates of various thickness, a 25mm thick outer plate protecting the tracks, a 40mm side plate behind them, and 70mm on the upper side. The turret front and rear were both 75mm thick, while the sides varied between 55 and 70mm. The vehicle was powered by two AEC or Leyland engines with a combined output of 190 horsepower. The lack of power meant it could only reach a top speed of 15 miles an hour on roads and 9 miles an hour off-road. But being an infantry support tank, this speed was deemed adequate. The tank's range was 50 miles on internal fuel tanks or 98 miles using external tanks as well. The main gun was the 2-pounder 40mm cannon, and it featured a 7.7mm machine gun as secondary armament. The Matildas first saw combat during the invasion of France, but thanks to the slow production, only a handful of them participated in the fighting. After the loss of France, though the tanks had shortcomings, they were kept in production, as at the time this was the best the British could produce in numbers, and fearing a German invasion, they needed as many tanks as possible. During this time, many of these tanks were kept in readiness, to be transported quickly by rail to any point where the invasion might happen. After the Battle of Britain, Hitler called off Operation Sea Lion, and as the danger of the invasion was gone, the British could think about sending reinforcements to North Africa. The Matildas arrived in Africa in late 1940, and they were extremely successful fighting the Italian forces at first, who had no answer to the thick armor of these tanks. In December, during Operation Compass, they earned their nickname Queen of the Desert. However, the arrival of the German Afrika Korps and newer, stronger Axis tanks ended the reign of the Matilda, as the German 50 and 75mm tank guns and the fearsome 88s were all able to defeat these tanks. Their lack of speed and reliability also quickly showed that the rapid maneuvering warfare on the vast African plains was not the optimal place for a slow infantry tank. By the end of 1941, beginning 1942, the 2-pounder gun on the Matilda was hopelessly outclassed. Its range and armor penetration was barely adequate, and its lack of high explosive shells made it very hard for the crews to deal with enemy infantry or anti-tank guns. By October 1942, the Matilda all but disappeared from the African front, replaced by the British cruiser tanks and American M3 and M4 models. The North African theatre was the last place where the British forces used the Matilda in combat, but other nations kept using it until the very end of the war. The most prominent and successful user was the Australian Army, who acquired more than 400 of these tanks between 1942 and 1944 and put them to good use in the Pacific theatre, where against the weakly armed and armored Japanese tanks, these heavily armored vehicles proved to be very useful assets. The Matildas fought in New Guinea, Tarakan, the Labuan Islands and other places, and for everyone's surprise, they were very useful, especially their heavy armor that could withstand the attacks of the Japanese guns, which were often camouflaged and only opened fire from point-blank range. The Soviet Union also received around 750 Matildas through Lend-Lease, but they didn't make a good impression on the Soviet forces. They were not well suited for the snow, and their weak armament quickly became a problem against the newer German tanks. The lack of spare parts and ammunition supplies were also a problem for these tanks. Altogether, production reached 2,890 units, and despite being designed before World War II broke out and being slow and undergunned, the type stayed in service until the end of the war and operated in every theatre. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please leave a like, subscribe to my channel, and in the comments let me know if there's any interesting events or vehicles you'd like to see.